No, it's recording.
Thank you.
Sure. So we have, architecture, construction, facilities management, and now the last couple of years, they added also real estate to the program. So now the big thing, how do we digitize all this stuff and start, the collaboration between trades and using technology as a sort of the glue that can enable better collaboration. So one thing, actually, I suggested to the dean was like, why don't we start using the school as a laboratory? So she suggested us to digitize the school. I was showing the reality capture that we're doing and so forth, and the concept of digital twin. So she gave a grant for some of the facilities management graduate students that I have to actually start scanning the campus. So this spring, we sort of shifted gears. So in the class, the students were actually scanning and then using this for the graduate facilities management program with the intent to build up this existing digital twin that can be used for design and all these other aspects, right? And the thinking of building up something that we can use simulation instead of representation that is traditional ways. So we also started looking at the professional practice class, the digital practice, and we tied that together now with the construction document class for architects using BIM, scanning, and things like that. So start weaving these classes together into more sort of cohesive sort of journey of learning. And obviously, I'm mentioning the digital twins here, but how that can affect then the project delivery methods, the aspect of collaboration, running analytics of all kinds of different types through this digital twin, how coordination, obviously in construction, but also design, being used, clash detection and the regular stuff, the quantification, and scheduling. And what we're looking at is actually incorporating is not just for construction, some of these very construction focused, but also on design and operations, and looking at the future of the AECO industry where we can start manufacture things directly from designs and so forth. So it's sort of creating a roadmap, and then obviously operations, and then actually decommissioning of buildings, the whole life cycle thing. And that's where we think like really jumping in, and all classes are using these kind of digital twin technologies is the way forward. And then how does it work in the delivery methods that involves everybody, where hopefully we think like more integrated ways of making buildings happen, especially with the prefabrication. So we, in the fall we ran the modular class with the Department of Design and Construction for homeless people, so which was very successful. And that's really looking at that integrated product delivery, when we can deliver projects also in a different way, but minimize the construction field time and build it offsite and then assemble instead of construct. So we've been using the BIM 360 platform there, and I must say it worked really well. I mean, as a professor, you have to work twice as hard, I think, because you're trying to figure out if everybody understands what you're talking about. When you're in the classroom, you can kind of read the room, which is much harder online. But the whole thing of sharing the documentation online, doing redlining, markups, using the issue tracking to actually track their homework, and the versioning, how does it evolve over time, the projects that they are working on, and so forth. So we were actually leveraging some of these Autodesk tools for that. So we created a framework where now all the existing stuff gets scanned, everything gets digitized, the models are created, and that the combination of the two creates that current condition twin. With a space register for all the spacing, and then the assets for all the objects, all the things. And then we're looking to plug in more things like IoT and people and things like that. But this is the core framework that we're working to solve. And the amazing thing is the speed now, the technology. And I'm using some technology I'm using in my company. So like the Brooklyn campus is like 6 city blocks, like 1 million square feet of outdoor space. We had captured that whole thing in 1 day. And the plant and all this like infrastructure first. So we were capturing sort of the nerve system of the campus, and then creating models of that. And over time, it's just going to be more and more complete depiction of the whole school. So it's and it's amazing like how these game engines can be used to actually visualize this, but also the traditional drawing generation of plans, space planning, and things like that. So and then creating drawing sets. But looking at how drawing sets can be in the contemporary space, like with this reality capture, there's actually very little modeling done here, but it's captured here and expressed. And then you can fill in the blank when project starts happening and things like that. Here's the 14th Street campus. So the students were scanning this, creating the model, then from the scan, and then asset inventories. And you realize actually how off the as-built drawings are from the real. And that's, I think, the big lesson here. The space planning is all about like figuring out the efficient usage, per square foot, but also ADA requirements and things like that. We're also doing some research here. So with the students using photogrammetry combined with very advanced laser scanning, create like crazy detailed models. So this is actually the dean's office window, where photogrammetry enables us to really zoom in like crazy. Kind of looking like where's all this stuff potentially going, so you can like zoom in like crazy. Of course, the whole building will be crazy file size, but really looking at this constant capturing that we're going into of buildings, and then tying that into a larger document set where you don't need the traditional drawings only. This becomes sort of a complementary thing. So we, as my graduate students, so we have also, through my work, we have teamed up with Pratt. So some graduate students helping out. So we're actually scanning enormous hospitals, like we're talking millions of square feet. It is super fast survey equipment, and then generating the documentation of this. And it's great for a graduate student, gets an experience of really understanding how buildings work and how to get spaces right. It's sort of it's BIM is spatial databases. So we've been able to uncover all kinds of inconsistencies and document that. So, she's been doing sort of research of what's the financial impact on this. So it's kind of amazing. You look all over, is these kind of discrepancies between reality and what they think they have. Not only it's hard to document traditionally, but also tracking changes and things like that, where changes have not been updated. I mean, I'm talking large facilities here. But the whole thing with room numbers and room names for hospitals, they have hundreds of thousands of rooms, and how little accuracy it is. It's unbelievable. So from a data-driven point of view for doing facilities management, if you don't have the correct core data, how do you know? How can you manage it? And that's the reason they can't. So that's an interesting sort of game changer here, where this technology, we actually use sort of a viewer, sort of Google Street View viewer, that then the students virtually walk through and check all the signage, and then compare to the as-built drawings, and then update the model based on that. And that's where they're looking at, machine learning on this, where actually extract numbers and names out of this, and then automatically generate those in the models. So, but they have this enormous space registers then to just keep track on, and it's a great experience for the students to really dig into this and be sort of the front line. So we found both at Pratt, but also on the hospital system, and I think for any building typology, the inaccuracies. So we're right now looking around 30 million square feet on a numerous hospital systems. We found right now where we're around 9% larger, the real size of the buildings than what they thought they had. So it's kind of crazy that they don't know what they have. Yeah. Let's see here. And also we're doing a Pratt here with the robotics lab, looking at future of manufacturing. So actually
are they paying taxes on their size of their property? Do they have to pay more taxes now?
This is going to be really interesting when how the impact of these things. But they're actually.
I'm being facetious, but you're 10 minutes in. That's what I actually wanted to say.
Oh, great.
So you still got 5.
But this is cool, like advanced capture technology. So I've had the students with cell phones capturing this, right? So this robot is a robot they have to use for manufacturing at Pratt. So we're actually just playing around a little bit with but they are scanning this with photographs and then processing, creating 3D models from. And this whole thing of equipping students with, I mean, everybody has cell phones right now, of like, can you use students to then capture and then do, create environments that way. So we're sort of experimenting there. This is the robotics lab where they make things. So we're like, we can scan it. And what's really interesting, like they have this robot drawing patterns in the sand, and then they spray it with this hardening thing, and that becomes a formwork. So we think if you can scan it and then 3D print forms instead. So it's this patterns for paneling and things like that. So it's really like looking at that experimenting with capture, making and connecting the different parts of the campus together. So facilities managers are not just in facilities management world, talking to designers, get that dialogue going and spawn ideas. And that's what I think, like, where we should go, like, to break down those silos, because I think innovation really happens when you start combining different ways of thinking about things. That's when the ideas really start coming. So that's what we did this spring, like, and I think the COVID in some ways have freed us to experiment more. We were forced to, because there's a lot of schools offering online classes, right? And so we had to, like, how do we do something different here? And so that combination of, because again, what is a traditional? I mean, we do obviously gonna need designers and constructors and so forth, but I think designers can be more involved in construction through these kind of manufacturing methodologies, and we have to start thinking life cycle if you're gonna be sustainable. So I'm super excited about, like, this. We'll see where we come out with this, but I think the overall thing, the academia has to learn too, that we have to question how we teach to be able to innovate constantly, because and that we need to keep learning all the time, So anyway, I think my time is up.
Okay, excellent. Brittany, do you want to go next?
Sure, I'd be happy to. That was excellent. Thank you so much.
Oh, sure, my pleasure.
And for everybody else, if you have questions, just put them in the chat.
Okay, are you guys seeing my screen?
Yeah,
we do.
Perfect. So I've been teaching with Phil. I apologize he wasn't able to make it today, but I'm happy to be here. I've been teaching with him for 4 years now. And we teach both the Exploring New Values Design in Practice spring seminar, which at this point it's at its, I think, 8th edition, as well as the required graduate course in the fall for architectural practice and management. And so I guess I'd like to kind of talk about how technology was implemented in both courses, really, and how it served to accelerate learning, particularly in the professional practice course. where we did some hybrid model that you're seeing here, as well as how students in the seminar engaged with technology as a tool in designing some new business models for the profession and kind of rethinking the profession as a whole. So it kind of became a catalyst for their design projects. So this is the 2021-2020 edition in the fall where we implemented the hybrid model after some kind of intense spatial analysis, which I believe Phil might have shared kind of a sneak peek of. We were also doing a laser scan of Rudolph Hall, the architecture school there. And basically the idea was to convert, if I just flip back here, we converted this exhibition space into a classroom for the semester because it's the largest space in the school and it has the most kind of ventilation and open air to it. But even so, we were only able to accommodate 18 students within the space in order to maintain social distancing. So of course that meant it was going to be a hybrid model given we had 45 students in the course, which is actually smaller than it typically is. Usually it's around 60. And then we had 4 students that were completely remote, on other time zones that would watch recordings, and we do additional discussion sections to complement the recordings. But even kind of in the pre-COVID classroom before we had to switch gears to the hybrid model, we were relied pretty heavily on technology. And we were able to kind of design for ourselves this tech-enabled classroom, which we're seeing here. It basically has kind of a panoramic series of screens at the perimeter of the space. And the way it worked was we had all our furniture on wheels and chairs, and we could reconfigure the whole thing, whether we wanted to be in lecture format or quickly switch to kind of these little group sessions where everyone could project their work and clearly work as teams. And it really created an interactive learning environment for everyone. And so we tried to do our best to kind of maintain that, because we like to basically break everyone up into firms for the duration of the semester to kind of simulate the office experience. And so we try to kind of transfer that same way of learning into the digital platform. But I think that in this scenario with so many students getting participation from everybody, really benefited from the in-person. But kind of switching over to the elective course in the spring, this one we were running fully virtually, and we had about 16 students, I believe. And so the seminar, for those of you who might not be familiar, is all about reimagining the value proposition of architecture practice. And technology and innovation were really key components to the conversation, both before and during COVID. The students spend the first half of the semester discussing the context of traditional practice and kind of looking critically at the basic services model and reimagining how we might articulate our value to clients, consultants, really the greater public, in order to create more value and hopefully, in turn, a little bit more profit. And so we kind of break the whole semester up into 3 larger learning objectives. So we start with talking about the context of the building industry. We share tools through workshops and use a couple techniques borrowed from the business school. We talk about risk management. And then the whole semester culminates in final projects where the teams basically pitch their ideas Pachakucha style, much like you might see on like Shark Tank or something like that. And so I think the remote learning did really enable us, as I'm sure many of you experienced. It enabled us to invite kind of a whole slew of experts as guests throughout the semester, which was really great. Even before COVID, we would have people come in and talk about how they started in the profession and switched to, became a developer and kind of merged the fields, or became a contractor. We've had shop architects come in the past and talk about that. But this year we also were able to get people from all over the world. For instance, Space Maker, the founder is located in Norway, and it's a software company that was recently acquired by Autodesk. So he was able to join our course. We had a senior project manager from Sidewalk Labs. a venture capitalist firm who invests in, they're called building ventures. They invest in a whole slew of new technologies in the built environment. And he actually came back and joined us for the final review. So I think that was a huge win for the students. And so I guess the question that I had, and it's always been something on the students' minds, we always talk about, is technology, is it going to destroy the industry, or is it, really going to move us forward in a positive way? And what are the pros and cons? And so I was interested in kind of asking the question of how students engaged with technology and actually used it as a catalyst for these new business model ideas. And so here's kind of a snapshot of some early investigations from the beginning of the semester, where the students looked at emerging value propositions, starting on what you're seeing on the left, where it says efficiency was the least extreme version of breaking the basic services model, where we're just talking about efficiency, get paid more, work harder. Those are really the only dials you can turn without completely abandoning the model. And then to the most extreme, or in between, you can add basic services, you can do other things on top of your basic services fee. And then all the way to the right, as the most extreme example, we call it the extramural to the supply chain, where you basically abandon that basic services model and offer something that is involved in the supply chain, but has a completely new business model. And that's really what we're trying to get the students to come up with by the end of the semester. They're not allowed to use the basic services model in their final presentation. So in past years, we've used this sort of interactive pinup process to form teams where each student puts 2 or 3 ideas on a sticky note, on a whiteboard in a classroom, and everybody gravitates towards similar ideas, and it kind of becomes this matchmaking process for team formation. So here's a screenshot of our COVID version, which was basically a Miro board, which was a great tool for the students to be able to interact in a digital pinup board and kind of mimic the exercise digitally, and they could return back to it. And so from these sticky notes came some really interesting business model ideas, and I'll just share a few themes. I think this year in particular, a lot of the projects were quite pragmatic. Many of the students were really attacking the business model problem by trying to embrace technology as a tool. And I say as a tool rather than, a solution, because all the projects were really very mission-driven ideas that somehow plugged into the larger supply chain rather than being software for the sake of software or some new technology. They were really mission-driven, and that came out of kind of each student identifying a pain point in the industry, whether it was from their experience or from research, to kind of look for wider trends and solutions to those trends. And so having looked at a number of these proposals over the years, we really observed that, like I said, that ideas were just much more pragmatic this year. And I don't know if that was a result of having gone through such a difficult time and just really wanting to solve a problem. But they were very systematic and I would say data driven. For instance, one of the student projects was called ArtKeep, and that particular team was interested in closing the information gap between each phase of the project, where you deal with, when you move to the next phase of the project, there's a knowledge lost as you transfer drawings to new team members. For instance, from the CD phase moving into the construction phase, there's a transfer of knowledge, and therefore information is lost and time and energy. And so they were actually interested in targeting the transition from building construction to building operations. And I think their motto was something like, "We design and we won't leave," which really just emphasized their goal to really improve building performance by trying to maintain an involvement in the lifespan of the building in an effort to kind of close that feedback loop. And also, if you think about the lifespan of a building, the start to finish of your project from design to construction versus the lifespan of the building itself, that's a much longer timeline that you can capitalize on as well. And there's questions about sustainability and performance if you're truly managing that building for its lifespan. So that was a really interesting proposal. And then another project was called Cost Cloud, where the students, it was one student in particular who had a really unpleasant experience in her time between graduate school, starting graduate school and undergrad, where she basically went through, as we're all familiar with, the value engineering process, dealing with lots of redesign and bidding. And so the goal was to create a cost estimation interface to help projects avoid mistakes and kind of better achieve cost estimation at an early stage. And what was interesting about this project is that, it needed to heavily rely on BIM modeling software as well as data provider partnerships to get that information, such as institutional partners, construction companies, material suppliers. So theoretically, they would have all these partners to be able to have the project implemented. And then finally, the last project was about tackling spatial implications of the pandemic head on. This project was called New Normal. And basically their goal was to really learn from the pandemic as re-engaging, how do we re-engage with the contemporary workspace? So they were asking questions like, how can you give owners, the tools they need to confidently own and operate their workplace in a post-pandemic world? Does everyone want to go back to the office, and what does that mean for the built environment? And also with an eye to well-being and healthy building standards as kind of a critical framework for the future of the built environment. And so that's kind of just a little sneak peek of what the students were up to and maybe where things will go for the profession in the future. So thank you.
Great.
Cool.
Excellent. I need to unmute myself. So, Charlie, you're up.
Yeah, that's some really great stuff. Let me share my screen. Share screen. All right, cool. So this, I'm remote, like really remote. I'm visiting the in-laws this week, so I'm only on one screen, but still can make do. So cool. It's great kind of having this discussion with everyone. So over the years, I've taught at a few different universities, Pratt and JT, and I currently teach at City Tech and RPI. And I'll kind of go through, the last two a little bit, my current locations, and kind of talk about how we interact with the students over the course of the last, I guess it's been a year and a half now, 3 semesters really. And then kind of also show some of their work, because I think, the student work kind of starts to speak for itself in a way. So at RPI, I'm part of the CASE program, which is located at Industry City in Brooklyn. And we all know that RPI, the main campus, is located in Rensselaer in upstate New York. Part of CASE, it's basically looking at topics like built ecology, environmental performance, building systems, and so on. And it really focuses on, what's the sustainability of the future. And we look into various different technologies to do that, from materials to parametric modeling and simulation, so being able to do predictions before design is actually kind of come to fruition. And we're also introducing this new track called design technology, which, we feel is essentially, you need to have these design technology chops to be part of the, the workforce, today, right? Back in the days, it used to be, knowing how to draft and then knowing how to model. And now we're getting to a phase where you need to do those, you need to be able to understand, design technology as a whole, right? And then there's various different, kind of subsets within these kind of 3 academic programs. What I teach specifically is environmental parametrics in the middle and the top, but we also have kind of the design programming, where we introduced scripting, we introduced data, geospatial data, and also look into kind of modularized systems. Well, I'll go through some of my students' work now, and I'll kind of talk over to a lot of this with regards to how the pandemic kind of shifted us. A lot of my work was already digital, so the content was already available. It was easily accessible for students, and that didn't really change so much. The delivery method went from in-person to remote, obviously, but what we were able to do is actually we were able to reach a broader audience because the CASE campus is located in Brooklyn, and the main architecture campus is located in Rensselaer. We were able to offer this class, but by the class being offered online, we were able to offer to students in both locations, right? So we were able to get a broader reach, which was great. And that led to yet like a higher and higher demand for some of the things that we're teaching in the CASE program. And it's kind of interesting also where I kind of opened each class with, who am I, where am I from, and kind of do it very casually. And we kind of get into like geographic backgrounds, and I'll talk about, where my family's from, and, they immigrated and yada, yada, yada. And we talk about, where everyone is located and so on. And it's very interesting to see where some of these students are located and kind of get a grasp for what some of these students are also kind of facing. Some of them are a lot of them are obviously in different time zones, right? So they're dealing with different challenges. Some of them are waking up at 4 a.m. and so on. But then there was also another incident where I got an email from a student, and I really didn't believe this at first, because I kind of, when I read it, was early in the morning for me, but I had to read it twice. And the student apologized for not submitting their work because their neighboring country had invaded them or started bombing them, let's put it that way, and took out the city's power. And she was apologizing for not getting her work done. And I was very kind of shocked in a way that was still a concern of hers. And I obviously wrote back and said, hey, obviously there are other things more important right now, like go take care of those and don't worry about your assignments, sort of thing, right? So it's kind of interesting how being able to teach remotely, you get, a different perspective on what individuals are dealing with, and how you gain a level of empathy for their location and so on, right? Some of them have spotty internet, some of them have better internet, that sort of thing. And then the students I still kind of teach as if I am in person. So I'll still do roll call. And that helps get people to, turn on their camera, turn on their microphone, interact. And it's not kind of like this, monologue of a session. Because that's the one thing I realized, about a year ago when we first went remote, is that it became a monologue. People were shy. People wanted to hide behind their screens. And I found ways of essentially turning that on its head. Another scenario was I realized a lot of people weren't turning on their cameras, which in a way is kind of fine. You don't really always want to invite people into your bedrooms or that closely into your life. But then, during one of the classes, I turned my camera off. It was when the students were presenting, I turned my camera off. And then at the end, we always do a retrospective. And I asked them, I was like, well, so what did you guys think that, when I didn't have my camera on? Did you guys think that I was there, I was busy, whatever? And they all kind of gave their 2 cents, like, oh, well, maybe he doesn't care, or maybe this, maybe that. And then I basically said to them, well, what does that mean when a student doesn't turn on their camera? Does that mean that they don't care or they're not active or whatnot? And then immediately all of them start turning on their camera, right? And it was a way of interacting and starting this dialogue with individuals. which was great in that sense. And then we also talked about different ways of, collaborating, because some of these projects, especially the ones that you see here at City Tech, they work in teams. So the idea of being able to sync files using Box and Dropbox or Google Drive or something like that, or OneDrive, right, became a no-brainer, right? So they were able to collaborate continuously and not lose a beat. And then another thing that I started to realize was that some of these folks we created, Zoom sessions for the classes and everything. It's the same Zoom session for the class. It just kind of repeats, and we don't kind of end it. So students can continuously log on, and they will at night log back on, and they'll kind of meld and kind of merge together and kind of find a new way of interacting with one another online, which was kind of great. So it took that studio experience, and I'm not going to stop here at the specifications sheet, because this is probably one of the most boring sheets ever. But it basically was a situation where it took that studio experience, and the students were able to find a new way to interact with one another and recreate it digitally, which was quite nice. And we do group sessions. So instead of doing desks, so I started doing Descrits, a year ago, and by anyone that's done Descrits for a full day, you realize your voice only goes so far. So then I started doing group Descrits, because there's a lot of comments that do go across multiple projects, and what that ended up doing is that it split the class into smaller groups, and students became more comfortable interacting with each other. So it started to take this moment of, from a moment of hesitation to a moment of collaboration, across groups as well. And that kind of worked out really nicely on our part. Let's see if I had any other notes. Finding ways of connecting, collaborating, technology as a craft. That's something that I always kind of push. I always was pushing it. And then it just kind of, became natural as we went remote to continue to push technology as a craft versus, it's not technology is going to take over humans, or humans' roles, but really it's going to augment our roles. Yeah, it'll take over some of our roles, but that will free us up to do other things, right? So it was kind of nice in a way. Like the latter 2 semesters were significantly more mature than the first semester being remote. With regards to kind of like how the university is adopting and all that, RPI, like I mentioned, we're going to continue to offer the class, even though RPI is going into, I think it's like an in-person this coming fall. We're still offering some classes virtual so that we can meet both campuses and offer the class to everyone. And then with regards to City Tech, there is discussion of keeping some classes remote because City Tech has limited real estate, but yet there's the number of applicants that apply there far outnumbers, the amount of spots that they have. And being a city, institution, it's a way to give education to those that may not afford Ivy League schools and so on. So they're definitely considering having, some of these classes continue to be virtual. I think Brittany mentioned Miro, which has been absolutely amazing for the collaboration side of things. It became our virtual pinup board. Just pin up your stuff. Let's talk about it. Let's go over it. Let's get you over it. And it worked out really, really well. I don't have any shots of the campuses because, well, I haven't been back myself. So, I can't tell you what's changed there. And not. I think that's it on my part.
Okay, excellent. Fascinating stuff. Okay, there we go. Yeah, thank you guys. Obviously, really interesting, albeit very different from what we usually teach, right? Just in terms of approach and how we talk. One thing that I was kind of curious about, we talked earlier about when everybody came on about the future of our workplace, right? And we were all kind of talking about a hybrid model where you do some things at home and some things in the office, that there's probably going to be a split. How did your students feel about this remote year compared to, have you asked, compared to the years before? What was their perception of this remote session thing?
It was definitely
Did I
hard.
like it? Did I hate it?
I think overall it was harder, and as Charlie mentioned, yeah, having students distributed all around the world, you had to deal with a time zone difference and internet connectivity issues, and also that some people were in small apartments with families and things like that. So that is definitely a challenge, you know. Overall, though, I think the quality of the work didn't go down. I don't know how you guys feel
I
about.
agree with that, yeah. And I would just jump in and say, it's given we did run a hybrid model in the fall, you know, that was a survey that we took with the students before the semester started to gauge whether it was going to be worth it, because it was a lot of work to make that happen. And they were strongly in favor of doing that. It did seem like there was kind of a reoccurring group that would come in, but I do think having that social interaction, although group work when you're also doing a Zoom session was a little strange because you're plugged in. You have to bring your laptop so that the students that are still remote can see you, but you're trying to do group work with someone that's sitting 6 feet from you. So it was a little bit of a strange reality to be in.
Yeah, I kind of agree on both sides of things. You know, Lennart saying that the students didn't like it. I do a retrospective in my classes. It's something that I brought with me from the tech world. And we just kind of, it's a safe space to say whatever you want, right? There's going to be no repercussions to what you say. And a lot of students didn't like it. And I asked why. And some of them said it was hard to focus. And then some of them said the professors don't care. And, you know, they rattled on a bunch of reasons. And then I started to unpack these reasons. Okay, so when you say it's hard to focus, why? It's like, oh, well, you know, my phone and family and music and stuff like that, whatever. And I was like, okay, cool. So I said, you know, when you're in class, we can make eye contact, right? So I can tell if you're playing around on your phone, or while I'm lecturing, if you're too busy with your head in your laptop and everything, right? Because I can see you, but you don't turn on your camera, right? So I can't see you. So yeah, and you know that I can't see you, right? So by turning on your camera, you now put yourself in a position where you're presenting yourself, right? And we can start to make eye contact again. And I can tell if you're not focused or anything like that. One thing that I do in my class, and I did this in person as well, is I call on students. You know, I have a handful of slides that we run through, which have, you know, various different topics. And then, you know, after each slide, there's a little bit of a dialogue. And I'll call through, you know, students randomly, and I'll say, you know, hey, Lennart, can you read through these bullet points and let me know what your thoughts are on these things? And, you know, hey, Brittany, can you read through these other bullet points and tell me what your thoughts are on these things, right? So I kind of, they have to be alert, and I make a point of engaging them, right? But there's the level of they need to engage as well. And when I started to unpack like why these students didn't like being remote, is because really in the end, they didn't know that they had to be engaged, right? students engage themselves in class because they're there, and you make eye contact to them. And when you make eye contact to a person, there's almost kind of like it kind of goes to either two ends of the spectrum. One is like a guilt trip, like I see you, I'm talking to you, now you have to focus on me, sort of thing. Or the other end of the spectrum is like, I see what you're talking about, you've caught my attention, we have now connected on something, right? So, and those are two things that I've been trying to, from the in-person, have been trying to bring to the digital side of things. I can't say I've solved it, right? But it's slowly, working its way and hashing its way. Right?
Yeah, I was in the fall I didn't teach because there was not enough students. Then in the spring we went back, and the class I was teaching is really simple. It's construction documents using Revit, right, with BIM. Students had never seen or touched Revit before, and they've been designing but never had to think about what construction documents are. So, that goes back to, the first principles that Charlie occasionally, I'm actually surprised you didn't mention that today, that we're on about and that we actually want to focus about, right, and get away from the tool teaching. The one thing that they did appreciate was the fact that the lecture part of the class, the Revit demonstration, was recorded because they could go back to it, right? And that's the thing, that when you're sitting there and you have your structure, you have like 45 minutes to do the Revit bit, you walk through it, you get distracted by somebody with the question, and then you don't go through all the points that you wanted to go through. And all that remains with them is the things that they wrote down, which is very little. This way they did not listen to the lecture beforehand. What we did, we recorded the lecture over the weekend, said, listen to the lecture before the Thursday class, and then on Thursday we meet and go over things. Nobody listened to the lecture beforehand, they just didn't. But then the next homework that was relying on that lecture, they could actually do homework and listen to the lecture and connect. And it got a few of them at least into taking advantage of YouTube University, because that's all I did, right? You record a YouTube bit. And a few of them actually did get into the mindset of, oh, I can do this. And they implemented things in their construction documents that I hadn't taught. Topography, I didn't touch topography at all. And they just voluntarily went all in for it. So there was small, but interesting advantages to that. Changing that mindset into actually, which I had never been able to accomplish before. I told them, hey, yeah, I talked about this, the things that I didn't touch, you can go on the internet and find all of this on YouTube. Nobody ever cared about that. Now that they got into the habit of, oh, I'm watching this and I'm learning this off of a video format, let me Google that and learn the same thing on from a different teacher. I found that interesting.
Yeah, for our construction documents class, we are fully Revit now, right? So, and we actually only use YouTube for all the basic stuff. There's no point of us standing there and talking about it. There's so much good documentation for the basic modeling. And then we do lectures about the very specific things, and then had support. And that's, I must say, worked really well, where we then had Revit hosted in the cloud. So they, instead of installing a software locally on the machine, they logged in and worked remotely that way. So we could hit the ground running, because usually the first 2 sessions was about, I couldn't install Revit, is not working, and so forth. And also having everything in the cloud and redlining things that the professors did, then you can start tracking things that way. So that worked actually really well, and we're gonna keep that. And but again, like that eye contact, and we actually instituted, especially on the construction documents class, that I'm managing sort of the BIM overview of that class, but it's 120 students and 8 sessions, where we mandated the students to have their camera on, because just that, so we can actually see if they're paying attention or not, you know. And in the beginning there was some resistance to it, but it's after a while everybody got used to it. And I even heard about some companies saying that you cannot mute your microphone unless there's a problem with the sound, you know, because that thing where you speak and people can get into the conversation. So
Just interrupt you like I usually do.
yeah, no, but live discussion starts, you know.
Yeah, trigger the, yeah, and that's been, you know, obviously a challenge. How do you emulate and try to get that live real work thing into this virtual 2D flat screen thing here? Yeah, interesting.
And we're looking now in the hybrid model to then get sort of big screens and really start testing some high quality audio equipment, so we can have our, not, you know, we're not looking at students remote, but have other parties remote, like DDC and things like that. So can we have them on a big screen with good sound and see, is that the future of the classroom, right? So we'll see this fall. It's going to be an interesting experiment, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, you know, what Andre, you mentioned about the YouTube videos. Interestingly enough, that's something that we had started to do before the pandemic, like years ago. Here's the lecture, this is the content we're going through, some of the basic Revit stuff you're going to need, and even sometimes some of the advanced stuff. These are YouTube links that you should go check out, right? Do this on your own time. We're not going to spend this in class. And then with regards to kind of, you were bringing up the topic of like, you pre-recorded the sessions and you expected the students to come to the class, like having seen those videos.
Mm-hmm. Prepare.
We do something similar with reading, right? We give them reading assignments, and they need to submit handwritten notes and sketches. So you can't just copy and paste the text out of a textbook and put it into a Word document and hit print and like submit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that we've always done, again, pre-pandemic. Like, you need to read these, you know, 20 pages or so on like project delivery methods, write down some notes, write down some sketches, sketch out some org charts or whatever, and submit that, right? We don't care if it's word for word out of the book, because at least we know
you must have read it. Yeah.
Exactly.
You're forcing
right.
people to actually engage with the material and not just fake it.
Yeah, exactly.
And you would have hated me as a student.
Well, your grade would have reflected your own behavior, so that's not my problem.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions coming in. Let's start with Matt. Matt is asking about floor plans. I think everybody can see that, right? Floor plans, and do we see students ignoring the functionality of a floor plan and getting distracted, so to speak, by the modeling and the shaping, which is less of a tech question, more of a design principles, design studio question. But let's go down that road for a minute.
Yeah, I think it depends on the class you're teaching, right? I teach 2 different classes, so I see 2 ends of the spectrum. One is like very conceptual, daylighting and all sorts of stuff like that, and then the other one is very pragmatic, like these are drawings, these are plans, these are sections. This is a BIM model. You need to be able to slice it and dice it properly and extract all the data out of it. So in my, environmental performance class, I don't teach, drawings, right? But I do teach drawings in my other class. And I do think that as good as Revit is and all that fun stuff, I think it is the thing that has destroyed architectural drawings and drawing standards, because it was sold as, here is an application where you can model and your drawings are done for you. And then everyone assumed, oh, they're done for me. I don't need to do anything else. So no one does anything else to make those drawings and plans and sections and all that stuff look as good as they should, right? So Revit is as it is made to do drawings, it's kind of killed the drawings in itself.
What the one thing that I hate most about it, it's really petty, but all of a sudden Arial became the one and only worldwide standard of architectural annotations. Arial, the font. That's just it, because it's a standard in Revit, and you'd have to spend a ton of time getting all your annotation families un-Arialed. But Arial is a horrible font. It's way too big, way too wide. It takes up way too much space horizontally. There's other fonts that are just as clear, but they take up less real estate. And yeah, it's a very tiny little petty, getting me way too riled up detail.
But it does make me, my mind goes to, oh man, how,
we're losing you. I think you're back.
I think you're back.
Sorry. I think I'm back.
Yeah. No.
Having a little trouble here.
Yeah, I mean, just to comment on that, like, it is possible to create beautiful drawings in Revit, but because it's so easy to create drawings, I think a lot of people, as Christopher said, like, it's just generic.
You just stop right there. You slice that section and you let it be, and you don't bother going in and making them look better, right?
Yeah.
That bit of touch of art is going away.
Sometimes there is ways, like, so I spend a lot of time trying to tweak it and get away from the Arial and spend that time. You know?
But it is time that, you know, I don't know, some design principles and some production managers don't give the staff, right?
It's a one-time thing though. So if you have, you know, set up that system once and then you just run with it. So, I mean, it's, I see both sides.
Yeah, I was going to jump in. I don't know if you guys can hear me now. Sorry about that. But this, I think it was Charlie mentioned something earlier in his presentation about augmenting our roles. And it brings up to me the question of, you know, we do fuss over the little details, and if there is a solution to change it as a one-time trick, that's great. But how much time, when I think about it, do I really spend doing all those silly little tasks like changing the font and this and that? So to kind of reevaluate our role and hopefully be putting our time into better spent seems like a great use of the technology.
Yeah.
You know, it's really, and I think it can be really off-putting if you give this sort of, you know, out of the box Revit. It's very hard to get it to look good. So that's what we did for the construction documents class, actually using a template, but everything is sort of, all the settings are preset, so the line styles look decent, and the view templates make it look more like what the drawing should look, I think, as far as the presence and clarity and fonts and all that. Because if you're out of the box, it doesn't look professional enough to me. You know?
And everything looks the same. There's a standard, but it's really a standard across the industry, and there's no differentiator in terms of, you know, it's very clear that you used Revit to accomplish that goal. I think that's a question about how the technology might even be driving our designs and our approach.
That's a really good point, and the danger is where the tool starts defining you.
Exactly.
And I think that's kind of why I've spent my entire life in the design technology, my entire career in the design technology side of things, is that when I was in architecture school, you know, we're going back quite a bit, I didn't know how to code or do any of this stuff, right? It was, back then it was AutoCAD and 3D Studio Max and Photoshop and Illustrator, right? And never was there a moment that I said, oh, I can't do this design because the computer doesn't let me. I always found ways of getting it done. So now it's not the first time where I've heard a student say, well, I didn't go down this path because I didn't know how to do it in this application or something like that. And I was like, well, in the design technology world, that's not our ethos. It's not I am kind of held captive of what the application can do. Now we've kind of turned that and say, okay, well, the application doesn't do that. I'm going to code it. I'm going to write this function myself, and I'm going to write this integration myself, and I'm going to, parse this data myself, and so on and so forth. And I think that's critical for not just an education to break these chains of the application, but also help us to think beyond what these applications are offering us, right? Everyone thinks of BIM as being Revit, and guess what? It's not, right? BIM is a more holistic process, right? It involves more than just an application, right? And to touch on Matt, the second part of that question that Matt asked, about, embracing Enscape, I'm guessing you're talking about rendering and visualization. I remember a comment that was given to me when I was in undergrad. I used to render a lot in undergrad. And during one of my crits, the critic called me out and he said, you render a lot, and your problem is you haven't fully thought out the design, because a rendering makes a design look like it's more complete than it actually is, right? So as an educator, we need to be smart enough to be able to see through that. And you can get a lot done through rendering, but if the student hasn't picked up on certain details, you then coax them and guide them down the path of like, well, go draw out this detail, go sketch out that detail, go do this, go do that. How do these things come together? And then kind of hash it out. But as an educator, we kind of need to be aware of that.
Yeah. Let's move on. Have a look at Brett here for a second. Difference between college education and practice. How do we adjust between the two? What are the differences, and how do we manage those two worlds? I guess the most relevant here would be Brittany, since she is actually teaching and in an architecture firm. I mean, Charlie is a programmer, Lennart is a scanner. Brittany is the only one who's a traditional architect.
No, it's a great question, and I think we all have a moment of kind of shock. At least I know I did, moving from the world of academia into the profession, and realizing that you have to design for a client, and you have to you have all these constraints that maybe were otherwise ignored, aside from a quite vague prompt. And so that's something that we're really keen to focus on with our students. And I think hopefully from some of the projects that I shared for the Exploring Values proposition, I think particularly the one that was talking about value engineering and cost constraints, and having a more systematic approach to connecting that information and making it maybe more transparent, was really a reaction to some of these struggles. It's sort of an artificial world we live in. And Yale, I know, does put pretty strong emphasis on the client in the first year building project, where we actually do have to design for a client, and the building gets built in the end. So having these moments where you're merging the reality of constructing something that will in fact, or designing something that will in fact be built, versus designing something much more theoretical. It's kind of a dance we play, and it is certainly a challenge. But I do think that there are values to having constraints, because it focuses you in, and hopefully some of those courses touch on that.
And I think you can do both. You can be realistic, but also open and finding creative solutions. I think that's might be an outdated view, because I encounter that a lot, where you shouldn't have any rules. They should be able to make any shape or whatever. So to stimulate the creativity, but I don't agree with that. And I think in other aspects also, as far as like reality, is the people, the different traits, learn to work on that side, because a lot, I think, is problematic where, I mean, that's where sort of I moved out of the design realm into looking at construction and the other, because I was like, there's such a disconnect, and I want to understand this. Why is this? And then you realize they don't even understand each other, these different sides. So so that people factor is really important. That's like reaching out to DDC, to get those kind of dialogues, you know. But it is a challenge, though. There's so much to learn, and only so many, you know, classes that you can have in the curriculum. So it's almost like you introduce something new, you need to remove something else, and that's always a challenge, you know. So
yeah,
I agree. I think as we continue to evolve as a profession, like Lenore mentioned, there's like more things that get tacked on, right? The concept of doing, you know, energy modeling, you know, 20 years ago was unheard of. It was strictly an engineer's job, right? And you can tack on many other different kind of new tasks that an architect does, right? So what do you drop off? There's a lot of first principles that I'm like really a proponent of, but I think those first principles should be like, you know, a mention, an example, and let's move on. But when you know that your students only retain, you know, 20% of what you say, and that's actually not, I'm not speaking, you know, like hypothetical, that's actually a study that was done. If I were to list,
proven truth.
yeah, if I were to list 10 bullet points right now, most people will walk away with 2, right? And they'll forget the other. And it was a study that I was part of, and I was like, oh shit, I only remember the 2. I'm like, okay. So how do you get them to remember those like first principles very rapidly to get those out of the way so that you can continue to teach the new stuff, right? Or as an industry, do we just drop that off? What do we do?
Yeah. While we're there, I want to loop in what Angie is just saying here. And I've earlier today I read another thing on an AIA forum, right? The role of the school versus the role of the practice, right? There is the idea, and I remember we had Phil when he did his book intro at the Revit users group. Somebody asked the question, I'm trying to hire a couple of young architects, young graduates, and none of them knows how to Revit. What's with that? Why are the schools failing? And Phil went on the rant. It is not my job as a teacher. I educate architects, not Revit technicians. And where is that? And Angie is making a similar point, and there was the same thing was just on an architecture on an AIA forum where James Van der Zandt was kind of putting out those both questions, right? Are we as educators, are we teaching the tools? Are we teaching the principles? And what are those 3 years of apprenticeship, those 3 years of internship, right, that we all need to go to before we get licenses? What are they for? Are they just to maximize productivity for the lowest possible hourly rate? Or do we need to, as a company, teach that generation, you know, the tool? And right, where do you see that balance there? I mean, Brittany at an Ivy League school, I'm coming from I'm teaching a really simple technical class at a technical school. The kids literally come to me and say, how do I Revit? Teach me how to Revit so I can get a job.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Yeah. And to me, it is a tool. It still comes down to it being a tool. And I think Lennart touched on merging, not just the
marketable
tool,
skills.
Not just the tool, but the, you know, the conversation between parties and how that tool can enable that interaction. And I think that's a key component to be able to, it's more about the skill set that you're learning and how you can apply that to a tool. And I mean, I've worked at offices that still, you know, that used MicroStation or that used, you know, not everybody's even going to use the same software when you come out of school necessarily. So I think it's about being able to apply that knowledge and that skill set to whatever task you have to.
Mm-hmm. I think that's pretty important. You know, a lot of so in the beginning of the semester, I asked some of my students, you know, like, what do they want to get out of the class? And like you, Andre, I'll get like a few folks that say, oh, I want to learn how to, you know, use Revit and all that stuff. And I'll kind of let them go through the entire class. And then once everyone's gone, I'll kind of break it down and say, well, 20 years from now, where do you see yourself? And they'll say, I'm this level and that level in a firm. And then I'm going to say, well, if you learn Revit and you didn't learn architecture, do you think you're actually going to get there? Right? Put that in perspective, right? I've been, I'm over 20 years since I started architecture school and everything. Some of the software that I learned back then is no longer around, right?
Yeah, even for me. I mean,
Amen.
it moves fast.
And guess what? It hasn't stopped any of us from drawing or modeling or rendering or designing or anything, right? So I think we need to kind of drill that home a little bit, that technology is part of the craft, right? And I think it's also false to think that the incoming generation is, what is that word, that phrase? Not tech savvy, but like digital literacy, digital literate, or whatever the hell it's called. I think it's BS, because maybe I'm biased because I know so much about technology, and maybe I shouldn't be the one engaging that one, but they take things for what it is and not for what it could be.
Yeah. And if it's it is in the end a production tool, and if that's the skill set that you have and you don't know how to apply it otherwise, the things that are going to get automated, I think we have to anticipate some of this information and work that we do right now that might eventually be automated, and where is our value, and what are we really trying to accomplish? For me, I think the pre-design, the early stages of design, the conceptualization, that's the stuff that's a little more difficult to automate, and really being able to be a mediator between all these parties and to get things done. That's where our skill set really lies. And so I think just learning the tool because you think that's what's going to progress you and get you through to the next level is a short-term solution, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I mean, our construction documents class, it's not a Revit class. We just happen to use Revit, and it's why not? Because the industry is using that as the construction document tool. But the focus is not Revit for architecture and whatever we do. And definitely, I mean, we're becoming ecosystems, and there's different pieces to plug and put together. And I think that's where, if I look at the tools I'm using, it's kind of amazing. If I drew like a map of all that, it would be quite extensive. And if I can plug in and plug out certain things, and I mean, yeah, we're pretty digital how we do our work nowadays, but it's just tools,
Yeah, and I think that, and I didn't want to skip over Matt's second question, but I kind of expected you guys to go exactly down this road, and that goes to Matt's second question there about focusing on the floor plan. I think Revit is nothing but another pencil. It's the next generation pencil. Whether you can draw a crappy floor plan with on Mylar, with pencil on Mylar, and you can draw a crappy floor plan on in AutoCAD, and you can draw and design an excellent floor plan in Revit. That's the mental work. That is not the tool. The tool is not keeping you from doing good architecture. And what the kids take out of the class and out of school by the time they graduate, yeah, it depends a little bit on the school and a lot on the teachers, right? And on what they want to take out. If they want to learn how to do an excellent floor plan, they can. I'm pretty sure, Charlie will teach them. And if all they want is, knowing where the buttons are on this particular set of software, then no matter what you do, then they will only listen to that, right? I mean, well, no matter what, that is then your job to make them veer away from that and see the bigger picture, which is what Charlie was talking about, right? That the next level of engagement there. Plans or model or whatever it is, I don't care. Architecture is architecture. You know, worldwide or not, a handrail might be a meter in Europe and 3 feet here. It is about hip height, so we don't fall over. That is a worldwide constant. No matter whether you do that in Antarctica or Central Europe, whether you do that with Revit or with a pencil, those things remain and those things need to be taught.
No, totally.
That's my rant.
Yeah, and I think with the City Tech class that I teach, it's called Building Tech 4. It's more BIM centric. We kind of go over concepts like that. We go over concepts of like, what is FAR? What does that mean for your site? And we give them the zoning data so they don't have to go and dig through it. But this is the table of zoning data. What does that mean? So how high is the building, right? What is your bulk massing, right? Like what can you build within and so on. We go through ADA regulations, and it's not just wheelchair accessibility, but we talk about why does a handrail extend, a certain amount beyond the stair, right? Why is the handrail a certain diameter, right? Like let your hand go limp. What is that radius that your hand does, right? Like, what are these kind of these things, and how do they relate to the human scale of it? And we talk about, I bring in the topic of efficiency ratio when you're developing your core and your floor plan, right? Do you want more leasable space, less leasable space? If you were the client, I try to put the students in a position where I ask them every so often, if you were the client, would you want more leasable space or less leasable space? Do you want to make more money or less money? And they're like, more money. I was like, all right, cool. So how do you redo this plan to make more money, right? Yep. That sort of thing, right? So I do kind of push them sometimes, and sometimes I think they're just not ready for it. It's like a little bit of a wake up call for them.
Yeah.
But it's not.
It's also, I see it also, and then I'll shut up. As one of what Leonard was saying, right? The more things we get, the more things we need to teach. There's only so much time. I had a facepalm moment this past semester. We're doing Revit stairs. First of all, I hate the Revit stairs tool. I think it's way too convoluted. But I hate more that it takes away all the thinking from the person who does this, who models that stair. What is a stair ratio? What is a tread to riser ratio? What does that mean? I did those back in the day by hand. I detailed 1/4 inch scale, rotating circular stairs by hand. How do you actually rotate around a center pivot point? I was supposed to just teach construction documents, and they had never. They've been 2-3 years in school, and they had never even heard about that. And I'm sitting there face palming thinking, oh my God, my colleagues here are failing these kids. I don't have time in this class to teach a whole set, to spend like 2 days on just what is a stair and what does it need for you to actually walk up comfortably. How do you walk up and down a stair, right? Those things get lost in when some of these tools take away our thinking. We love that they take away our thinking, but we need to still understand how that thought happened.
So that's really, like, we've been running this construction document class now that we use Revit like 4 or 5 years now with Revit. But the challenge is almost becomes 2 classes. One about how do you do construction documents, the other how do you use Revit. So that's why we have created libraries, the template, the views are even set up for them, because I want to eliminate the learning curve of Revit, so you can actually understand how a construction document set is supposed to be.
We've gone the other way around, because the students went into offices and said, where's the template? And Leonard, I've worked for you. I know your template. there is barely any office that has a template that is half as developed as yours. So these kids need to actually know how to handle Revit out of the box, because all the template things that you have put in there, they're not in 90% of the offices that people
I know,
use.
but it's like the philosophy of like to set it up once, to spend the time once, and then it's easier, you know?
90% of architecture offices don't have you or Brittany or Charlie or me. And if we are there, I'm not being given the time to do that. My template in our office is still a work in progress after 7 years, because I don't ever have the time to go in and fix that damn thing. I'm not given the overhead time to do that.
Which is a shame,
Project
because
billable.
yeah, and it's
Yeah,
such
I
a
know,
shame, because if we really were to map out the time it would take you to set it up, and then over the course of however many years of using that template, how much time would be saved.
Yeah.
But
they might invest
then you
in
switch,
it.
and then you switch firms, and then I do this again. It's
Exactly.
been 3 or 4 firms since I've left Leonard. I'm trying to implement his ideas at every one of them, and every time I switch firms, I'm less motivated to go in there again and go like, oh, really?
Start from scratch.
Yeah.
I think that's a firm operation management. You know,
Yeah,
as
it
we
is.
say, you know, here we're talking about how education needs to change and reform to think, you know, more in the future. I think firms need to do the same thing too. And this idea of you're going to do a task, which yes, will benefit the greater good, but that task is overhead and not billable. You can't do that. You must be 110% billable. You know, I think that's something we need to, you know, someone mentioned system thinking in the chat. It's like, we do need to think from a border perspective. And I'll give you an example, right? And this is an example that everyone's always related to. I did interiors for a hot second before I realized I needed to go to grad school. And I was working on a project, and they said, oh, just use this detail from this other project. So I pulled it out and I made the modifications and I used it. And it like clicked to me. I was like, wait a minute. So the first time that this detail was drawn, those hours were billed to this specific project, right? And then that detail was put into a library. And then every subsequent project that detail was used, you know, there's a minor modification and, you know, hours were billed, right? So why can't this be an evolutionary thing that you're doing it to make your project better and you continue to grow it that way versus trying to boil the ocean right from the get-go?
Yeah.
Right.
Totally agree with that.
And that's the thing, like you need to spend a little time in the beginning, making sure things set up. I've seen it so many times where let's start a project and you start modeling and then you're in a mess. And then, so like, yeah, it's management, really. It really comes down to that, to have a plan, have a structure, have a strategy, how you're gonna run the project. So, and I think architects are terribly bad at that. Yeah.
Yes.
We're good at wasting time.
I'm the guy who gets hired for DD. And I can't tell you how many times I get on a project when it's like SD or DD, you staff up and I inherit something and I'm sitting there thinking, like one junior production person with, you know, 2 senior principals has been doing some work. And I know I've trained that junior production. I'm like, why aren't you following the rules that the things that I've taught you? I know you're smart enough. I know you know this. I know we've been together through 3 sets of construction documents. And the answer is inevitably, I didn't have the time. They gave me this information at 4 o'clock in the afternoon for a 9 o'clock meeting in the next morning. I didn't have the time to do this right. I needed to do it quick and dirty. And there's a mindset thing that, you know, I'm just ranting right now. Keep going. Sorry.
Well, I do think it ties to this question of like making, I think the profession is very much about trade-offs, both in the decisions that we make based on constraints and what we decide, what avenue we have to take our clients on when we make design decisions with them. And it's also a trade-off within the operations of the firm as well. You know, spending the time up front versus redesigning something and doing it from scratch every time. It's a trade-off that we're making. So how can we adapt our way of working to better utilize our staff? But I think it also ties to kind of our systematic approach to solving problems within by using technology for businesses, because even if we're auto-generating 100 solutions, say, and the computer gives us this 100 solutions, we still have to somehow choose from these options. And how do you make that decision?
There's a danger with that automation, because I notice that all the time. We do a lot of automation stuff. The amount of time it takes to review and actually figure out what is longer than actually do a systematic and a simplistic way. So I'm not saying one is, but to be aware of that. In the end, am I actually working better with this automation? Right. If not, maybe that's not a good idea there, or it needs to be done in a different way,
Yeah, totally. I remember when I was working at an architecture firm, we had this one guy come in, and he, had a little bit of a specialty. And during one of his presentations, he said, "Oh, we can generate 35,000 options, and we could show these to the client." And everyone in the room, except for him, realized that that was not the brightest idea, right? And automation helps execute things, right? But then there's a post process, and sometimes that post process could be automated to dwindle it down, right? Optimization strategies or whatever, right? Building and fitness functions or whatnot, to weed out, the like 99% of those 35,000 options that are not adhering to what a proper design would be, right? So you kind of have to, it's not just push a button and go, right? But it's like, let's think before we push that button. And do we need to, define our domain space a little better than, the full extent that it could be?
Yeah, and the same thing in machine learning, right? Involved with some of those initiatives, and I'm realizing the amount of interpretation and experimentation you need to do before you get something right. And that's where I start questioning, like, it has to be a very specific use case for you using it. I mean, it's a whole field that is just exploding, super interesting, but it is that time cost of interpretation and analysis then, and that needs to be taken into account, so.
I totally agree. And we actually had this conversation, it was yesterday. There's this, at TT, we have a couple of, ML models for schematic design of structural systems to kind of like rapidly iterate and get us to an SD level very quickly. And we're looking at, maturing this and all that stuff. And it's actually one of our interns that kind of came up with this idea, and they told us the chart. They plotted out the chart of, time and effort and kind of like the optimal solution and everything. And at one point they just drew a line and said, we'll cut off ML here, and this last 10% will do, physics-based modeling versus ML-based modeling, and that will get us to a solution a lot faster than if we just use machine learning by itself. And this is kind of one of these moments of, it's not automation, but it's augmentation. Right, we're still bringing in those classical, FEM models and classical calculations for designing structures, but we're bringing it at an end where we can do things, faster and so on.
I mean, overall, it's like a trend, like the process and process awareness and management becomes more and more important, because you have so many ways of doing it now. So the skill set is really to choose what's the best when and how to combine it, right? So
and on top of that, projects are getting increasingly more complex. So you have that factor to deal with as well, and more parties involved. And it's just this snowball effect. Really, management is key.
Yeah, and where I always talk about, like, simplicity, to keep it as simple as you can always, because that it just, I think with BIM and Revit, like, some people think more data is better, but it's almost the opposite. There should be less data, because you have to validate every single data. And if you have data that's not validated, you mix that, it's hard to, so you get a mess, right? So that's why we're doing vector reducing to the bare minimum of what we know and use with that, and then build slowly on top of that. That's the thing when you get these models thrown at you, and it's just, you don't know what they have validated or not, and so forth. So I find, like, when you do simplicity, you can move very quickly, and that's where the sort of promise with these tools, that you can actually do things very quickly.
Totally agree, and I think that's where the first principles start to come into play as well. Like,
Yeah.
I'm pretty anti the big data thing unless you're dealing with, you know, large systematic problems. But I'm all about the data that matters. And I'll give you an example. Like, one of the last projects I worked on when I was in architecture is it's a skyscraper in downtown Manhattan, and we were able to describe the entire facade, over 3,000 facade panels, in 1.7 megabytes of data. Now, I don't know if you remember, like those little square floppy disk with a little spring-loaded thing. That was 1.4 megabytes. I think I could have made the data efficient enough to fit on one of those. Imagine being able to describe a facade on a floppy disk. And that 1.7 megabytes of data is what the fabricator needed.
Yep.
They took
Incredible.
our model and directly fed it into their pipeline, which was really great, right? So screw the like 6 gigabyte, you know, BIM model with all these additional attributes and all this other metadata in there that doesn't and file format, you know, clunkiness and all this other stuff that needs. What's the data that really matters, and kind of like look at that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we've gotten, I mean, there's a lot of just commentary here, but I think when it comes to questions, we are pretty much through. If we're skipping yours and I don't see it, please accept my apologies. It's late.
I think there was one that's probably worth talking about. It was a little further up, and it was talking about diversity within the industry.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and
That
I
is
think
a
that's
whole different thing.
That's worth mentioning.
Yeah.
Because there's a level of it's obviously a male dominant industry still, and it's going to be that way until we can get newer folks and newer generations up, right? I believe that it needs to happen from the universities. Get more students and more diverse students in the universities, and get them, you know, populated up the stream.
I mean, I was actually surprised the last couple of years. I've had some CM classes where we actually more women than men, which is so cool.
It's excellent.
You know, maybe it's an isolated place because of crowd. I don't know, but it is great to like break down all these barriers, because I think you get better solutions the more diversity.
Yeah, I'm working in a very oddball company, especially in our New York practice. We have more women than men in the office, and I'm loving it. I've worked with you know, particularly on large co-located offices with star architects for like convention centers and airports, and you see these guys come in and it's all just chest pounding and egos and my design strategy. And that was actually my first Revit project, where like one company was like, no, we don't do this new falutin Revit thing, we want to go AutoCAD, and it was just egos. The more women you have in the room, the less egos you have, and the more you are actually fact-based and problem solution-based. I love it. I love the fact that most of our office is female, which is why when Phil bowed out and you know said
it was
Brittany,
all part of the plan. Yeah.
my first reaction was excellent. One less middle-aged cis straight white guy. Good.
Happy to help.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah, we have a comment from Mark that says you need a healthy mix of cattiness and chest bumping. Very true.
Yeah. No, I mean, and also you know, that's what New York is kind of unique. I mean, everybody's coming from different countries, cultures, and that mix. And I mean, the offices I've been working in, it's complete mix, and I think it's great because
Yeah.
everybody's experience is a little unique, and it's to have a foster an environment where people feel like they can speak and and pride is it's kind of amazing the amount of effort now in true equality in the classroom, and so forth, because there's been structural issues historically with these things. So
it helps bring a different perspective to things. Like a little over a year and a half ago, you know, we had our first kid and everything. And, you know, I've seen, you know, couples, you know, get pregnant, have a kid and all that stuff. And yeah, you give them your seat on the subway and all this, like these polite things that we were always taught. But I never understood what it meant to be pregnant. Never what it meant, what it was to be pregnant and go on a job site and stuff like that, until I would hear the feedback from my wife.
yeah.
And these are perspectives that a lot of us won't see. Now that's just one scenario, right? Minorities, you know, different cultures, different backgrounds and everything, and totally give a different perspective on things. One of my students, she's former students, she's quite inspirational in the fact that after several semesters, she reached out to me and she said, you know, hey, I'm graduating soon. I'm looking for internships. This is what I want to do. And she told me her story. She said that, you know, she came from a country where walking to school every day, she saw a lot of people living on the streets, you know, in the Middle East. And it really affected her growing up. She was fortunate enough that she was able to, you know, migrate, get an education and everything. And she wants to now look into developing, you know, affordable housing and things like that, and like helping, you know, refugee nations and all this sort of stuff. And she asked me for advice, and I made that a mission of mine to like find a way to give her good advice. Having been born and raised in New York City, what do I know about, you know, refugees and all this, right? So I went and I actually found close to a dozen of different organizations, you know, Habitat for Humanity, the Red Cross, there's a refugee organization. There's a whole slew of these organizations that, yeah, they, you know, there's one in the US, whatever, I can't remember, emergency management, something, whatever that one is. Like a lot of these institutions also need architects to help, you know, design and build and so on and so forth. So I was able to find postings and listings for her to apply to, because she didn't want to work at a architect office or anything like that. She wanted to work, you know, to help things. So that was another perspective of like having someone come from a different country and show that they wanted to give back to humanity, let alone society.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. That's, I mean, you say born and raised in New York, you have, you know, what do you know? You know probably more than most other Americans, because you are, you know, born and raised in New York. I'm an immigrant. You know, I've worked in Atlanta, I've visited other places. You know, that's the other side of diversity, that actually in New York, we don't even take it for granted. It's just there. Like we can't even escape it, right? The fact that our schools are so diverse, and that, you know, our streets are so diverse. I don't know whether that's just, again, my company, where we are 1, 2, 3 immigrants and 1 first-generation American. But even in other companies, I've seen plenty of diversity on that front. In New York, Atlanta, very different. All right.
Great.
Excellent. I
Great
think we've all
conversation.
earned our dinner. I don't know about you, but I haven't had dinner yet. Thank you so much. Brittany, welcome to our little group here. I'm pretty sure I'll be annoying and hit you up again in
Please do.
you know, a couple of months. We're always interested in having our speakers come back. It's, as I said, it's not easy to put on these shows. Leonard, Charlie, as usual, you know I love you. We'll do this again sometime.
Great.
Everybody else, thank you so much. And I hope I'll see you on, I think we said August 12th or so, right? Yeah, August 12th. I'll see you then. Have a good night and enjoy the heat wave.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.